My name is Jeffrey Sidoris. Welcome to a brand new season of Process Driven, the show that gives me the opportunity to sit down with creative people I find interesting or inspiring to talk about what moves them, and specifically what moves them to make art. This is going to be a terrific season of PD, but before we dive into this episode, I want to let you know that I've created a brand new feed that will allow you to listen to everything I do. Every episode of Process Driven, every iteration, all of the one-off conversations, as well as any new show that I happen to do. And just to be clear, this new feed isn't replacing the individual show feeds. It's just a way to get everything in one shot without having to subscribe to multiple shows. It's called Jeffrey Sidoris Everything, and you can find it in your favorite podcast app. As I said, this is going to be a great season, and I'm starting it off with a conversation with one of my favorite people, author and photographer David duChemin. I first spoke to David in 2009 after reading his book Within the Frame, and since then we've recorded a number of conversations together. And in addition to being a fan of both his words and his pictures, I'm proud to call him a friend. We begin the conversation talking about David's new book, Pilgrims and Nomads, a body of work that's taken nearly 12 years and multiple trips to Ethiopia and Northern Kenya to produce. And as is often the case when David and I sit down, the conversation quickly seems to find its own rhythm and its own direction. Here's another conversation with David duChemin.
Please listen carefully.
Why this book? Why right now? Why was it important to assemble this body of work and reflect on these past 12 years and put out this particular volume?
That's a good question. I have to be honest and say, I do a lot of things very intentionally, and I talk in my teaching about the intention, but I also think sometimes it's a little bit more organic than that. And you wake up one day and you go, today is the day, now is the time. And I found myself having come back from a number of these trips, pondering whether, in fact, I would do more of the trips that have contributed to this book, or whether, in fact, it had reached its logical conclusion. And so I sat down, and I think in order to answer some questions, you just got to, put your pen to the paper, or you got to pull up your images and start working. And I started assembling what felt at the time like sort of a speculative draft version of the book. Like, if I were doing a book right now, would I have the images that represented this experience and these travels and these people and places? And I got done this speculative effort and went, there's my answer. I now have a book. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't, I didn't sit down and say, okay, in fact, I was wondering, would it be this or would it be my underwater work? And I've been pursuing my underwater work so hard that I, for a long time, thought that was my next book. And when I started to play around with this idea, it just fell naturally into my lap. And I went, it makes sense. It makes sense that this is the time, because it was sitting in front of me all laid out in InDesign. And I went, yeah, that's the book that I would want to do. And so why not do it now?
Mm-hmm. Was there ever any thought of anything other than these two places, or from the beginning, was it predominantly these two places, Ethiopia and Kenya?
Well, it started as two completely separate projects, and the realization that if I was going to go all in on a book like this, books like this, they're, especially, if you don't send them offshore to be printed, if you keep them, in North America, and if you go with a printer that is ecologically sensitive and isn't going to cut corners, they're extraordinarily expensive to print. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt like if I was going to do it, just cutting the page count, only cuts the cost a little bit. So it was, do I do just one of these monographs? Do I just do my Kenya work? Do I just do my Ethiopia work? And the more I looked at it and started at the beginning of putting this book together, I played with versions that were sort of solo monographs, and then I put the two together, and it made sense. The idea of pilgrimage, the idea of nomadism, the idea of myself as a wandering photographer that was doing it in a sense both as pilgrimage and as in the spirit of nomadic travel. It just made a lot of sense to me. The idea kind of fell into my lap, and when I realized that Pilgrims and Nomads was a sound marriage of the two, it just, like I said, it just made sense. And then the more I pursued it, the more I kind of got married in my own mind to this idea of the relationship between the two, right? And geographically, they're so close. Kenya is only to the south of Ethiopia. And in fact, the places that I photograph in Kenya are quite close to the Ethiopian border. So even sort of socioculturally, I suppose there are some similarities between the people. It's not like I was doing, a book on South Korea and a book on Australia,
right.
Trying to force them together. There was a cohesiveness that already existed there.
There are a lot of photographers out there who are either wrestling with or in the production process of self-producing a book with so many sort of book publisher books behind you. Was it important for you to do this yourself rather than connecting or partnering with a publisher?
Yeah, it was really important. In part, I mean, self-publishing is sort of funny. The lines have become blurred. I mean, the fact is I own a publishing house. It's small, and at this point, I only now publish my own stuff, but we are a publishing house. And that allows me the most amount of creative freedom. It allows me the most freedom from logistical and financial. You still have to be smart, but I get to call the shots. So when I built this, my only financial goal for it was for it to break even, so that the project would pay for itself, and then I would have a stack of books that are my work presented the way I wanted, and that I can give them or sell them or whatever I want with them without any of these other considerations. The moment you hop into bed with another publisher, you are taking a dramatic cut in terms of what you would make financially. You're giving up some of the risk, allowing someone else to assume that, but you're giving up a huge amount of control. And I thought, cards on the table, these things cost about, I'm thinking of US dollars here, probably about 35,000 US to do 500 books. And then on top of that, there's packaging and there's shipping and that sort of thing. But if you can look at it and go, okay, I have over the years saved up enough to publish my own thing, and the making money on it is not the immediate short-term goal. If you could pre-sell enough to cover your printing costs, which is not what I did, but if you did, that would help mitigate some of those initial costs, and you could break even.
Sure.
But you would. The thing that you gain is the creative control and having no one else to consult about except you, and following your own creative kind of desires for it. And I think you have to ask yourself, why are you putting this book out there? Is it for credibility? In which case, you probably want the biggest possible reach. You do not want a limited edition of 500 copies. Okay. You want like a mass market, something printed in China, a little bit, considerably cheaper. And you want to be able to sell this thing to everyone you can get into their hands through Amazon and that sort of thing. I didn't want that. I have mass market books already that get my name out there and that that serve a need for credibility. I wanted this purely if this was an itch I had to scratch creatively. I had to put this project to bed in a way that tied it up and gave me something to hold in my hands so that I could myself sit down in my chair with a glass of whiskey and look at it and remember it and think about it, rather than always pulling it up in Lightroom or going to my Instagram feed to, because these are not just photographs. They're strong memories, and they're important.
How do you, because you are, yes, a photographer, yes, a writer, but with this body of work, you almost assume the role of photographic anthropologist, in the sense that this is a 12-year journey. And I would imagine that there are some changes, maybe subtle, because you're talking about some of these places that have been around since the 12th century. But I would imagine that you have seen some changes in the past 12 years in these successive trips.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The places have changed, and yes, they've existed for thousands of years, specifically in the case of the stone-hewn churches in Lalibela and the context of the Ethiopian Orthodox faith. It has existed for a long, long time, but it's only been recent that they are conducting their mass on Christmas Eve by the light of their iPhones. And so it does change. It changes things visually. It changes things culturally. Tourism, the more people go to these places over the 12 years I've been going to Lalibela, I've seen an incredible increase in tourism. The once dusty, graveled or cobbled roads are now paved. Water projects are coming in. And so it has changed dramatically. But with those changes comes at first frustration, because I kept seeing these people with iPhones and mobile phones, and I was kind of frustrated. And then I realized this is a great opportunity for juxtaposition and for me to grow up a little as a photographer and stop photographing things exactly the way I hoped they would be through this sort of romantic, Indiana Jones lens, more through this is how it is now, and how can I incorporate that into my vision? And I've noticed that with in the Nomads section of this book as well. I'm working with nomadic and semi-nomadic pastoralists in northern Kenya, and it is the weirdest thing in the world to be photographing them out in what feels like the middle of absolutely nowhere, and they're with their herds, their sheep, their camels, their goats, whatever, and suddenly they pull out out of their beaded, their beadwork, they pull out a mobile phone. And
hold on, I just got to check Twitter real quick. Hold on.
Yeah, it's just amazing, And rather than fight that kind of thing, there's a portrait in the Nomads monograph with one of these herders that's got a knit toque on that says Obama on the front, And apart from that toque, he's just an old herder that you could have photographed this, but for the need for the technology to capture it, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And here he's wearing this, this Obama toque. And it just, that kind of thing has been really fascinating. And the change has been exponential. To see the difference in even just 12 years has been unbelievable. And mostly it has to do with handheld technology.
Mm-hmm. Did it get to a point where you had to either retake shots or ask people to put phones away, or did you just let the action sort of unfold and wait for the moment that you wanted to capture?
As time has gone on, I have found the desire to enforce my will on these scenes, to make these images contrived and
almost direct them. Yeah.
Yeah. I have found the desire to do that less and less prevalent. Because I'm less and less happy with the images themselves. I like, and this is not me saying anyone should do it any differently than they desire to do it. But for me, I find less satisfaction when the image isn't just an authentic, as much as can be authentic, in the presence of someone from another place that's got a big camera and whatever. I like to see how these moments play themselves out rather than being a guy in the audience calling directions for the actors on the stage. I rather just see what happens. And yeah, there have certainly been times that have been frustrating. I was talking to this one gal that, this one older nomadic woman, she was Rendille, and I was trying to make her photograph, and her cell phone kept ringing, and she kept picking it up. And I was trying to do a more formal portrait. And this was my very first trip. In fact, one of my first days on one of my first trips. And my biggest frustration, even bigger than the frustration of being there and trying to wrangle this little Rendille woman with her damn phone, my frustration now looking back is that I didn't roll with it, that I didn't photograph that, because that would have been much more authentic. That story is, for me, is a part of it. And at the very beginning, I let those things, put my camera away until this woman was off her phone. I wish I had photographed through it, because the contrast of her in the middle of nowhere with, all her beads and, no top on except for these beads, and, surrounded by snotty-nosed kids and her hut and her herds. And, and she's on her cell phone. It was fantastic. And for the love of me, I cannot figure out why I didn't pick up the camera and photograph it.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. How do you see your approach to the work? What are some of the changes that have gone on internally with you, or even externally in what you focus on and what you capture over this past 12 years? Because this is, I would imagine you've had some pretty dramatic aha moments yourself.
Yeah, I don't know if they've been aha moments so much as narrowing or focusing moments. You know, when I've had this realization that the work is going deeper rather than broader. And I think at a certain point as a photographer, you stop photographing things and you begin to explore ideas, or at least certainly that's the journey that I've been taking. So when I realized that some of the ideas that I was pursuing, when I realized I was pursuing the photography of ancient faith in modern times, but in this ancient touristed place, when I realized I was photographing nomadism and their life, not merely the odd shot, you know, and that I was pursuing a body of work. I think the biggest change in my photography has come when I started to make the switch from individual one-hit wonder shots, or the pursuit of those, to how do these work in a body of work? How can I create something that is bigger than that single image? And can I do it? Would that approach make my work more focused? And would it make those images together, the impact of those images, would it make them more powerful? And I think resoundingly the answer has been yes. And so it has pushed me further and further. When you realize you have this body of work that you're creating and there is a missing piece, you go looking for that missing piece. When you realize you're hitting the same note 2, 3, 4 times, you get more ruthless about your editing. And so the whole thing has actually been a relatively long, 12 years is a long time to learn a lesson like this, but it's been a lesson in kind of getting my act together as not just a craftsman, but an artist with ideas beyond merely the desire to, shoot a Steve McCurry-esque like photograph.
Sure.
Which I think is how many of us begin. But we evolve, right? We change, and that's the direction that my evolution has taken me, is toward these bodies of work and the idea of photographing ideas more than merely photographing a person.
Well, I think there's a big idea, particularly in the second body of work, when you talk about this concept of otherness, and I wonder if we can kind of dive into that a little bit, because I think that it so fits with the arc of your storytelling. Again, why was it important to take that point of view, or to share that point of view in this body of work? And what does it mean to you to share that?
Wow, that's why it's important to me. I don't actually know. I just recognize that it is important to me, and it is important that I get the thing that's on the inside to the outside. And it has been one of my big revelations as I've traveled over the last 15 years or so, that this idea of otherness, this idea that no matter where you go, we are all on the surface so very different, and yet so very much the same. The things that we laugh about while we're eating dinner together, whether you're eating, dodgy goat stew in the middle of the desert in Kenya, or around the dinner table, here on Vancouver Island where I live. These things are all the same. The way we laugh at jokes and, tease each other. And I have the further abroad I have gone in this world, the more I keep seeing myself in the faces of others. So, and I think it's one of the fundamental problems of our time. And I'm not trying to tackle that with this book. I sort of want to give a nod to it, and it's probably what informs my creativity. But, one of the fundamental problems of our time has to do in some way with the idea of, pilgrimage and nomadism. We use different words. We call them migrants and refugees, but, people looking for homes, and where do we belong in this idea of you can't stay here, it's not your place, said by someone who only generations or a generation before, it could have been said about them. You can't stay here, this is my place. Well, sure. Do any of us actually own a place? And what is it like to be a stranger. And moreover, why does it even exist, given that we are all so, despite the external differences in the languages, we are all so much the same. And, it's one of the things I am most interested in when I photograph, not just this body of work, Pilgrims, but any place where I photograph expressions of faith, whether it's in Nepal, photographing, Buddhist monks and pilgrims there, or, in India and photographing Hindu ritual or Muslim worship. What are the things that we hunger for? The way we express that hunger is different everywhere, and yet the things that we hunger for are all the same. So that's, those are the things that kind of go around and keep me up at night and ultimately push me to pick up the camera and photograph some things rather than others.
Was there a reluctance isn't the word, but did you ever sort of wrestle with the idea of writing more? We talked a little bit before we started recording about there are only 2 essays in this book, and your words are so powerful, and you are such a passionate writer. Was there ever a thought to include more, or will there be some sort of maybe companion volume that is more of an essay driven project than a photographic one?
There wasn't. In fact, there was a temptation to go in the other direction entirely and put no words whatsoever in the book. I spent a lot of my time, as you know, I write a lot, and I just wanted to put something out there that was my photographs. I didn't want EXIF data or captions. Sure. I wanted as much as possible for the images to speak for themselves. However, context does inform certain readings of a text, whether it's words or images, and I think having some expression of here is what I intended to show, here is to give a little bit, because a number of people have said, boy, the short essays at the beginning were really helpful for me to understand what you were doing with this.
Absolutely.
So I am pleased that I put them in, but I wrestled hard and long with the idea of putting nothing, because I do, despite what I've just said about context being important, I do also think that the less we say about our work at times, unless you're trying to communicate actual information, the less we say about our work, the more room there is for the person on the other end experiencing those images to interpret in their way, without me saying, this is a picture about this. This is a poem about this. I had a roommate in college for a while, and he was a poet, and he would write these really kind of obscure, hard to figure out poems. And I would say, I'd read it a couple times and then go, okay, so what's it about? And he would throw it back at me and say, well, you tell me, what's it about to
what
you?
do
And
you think it's about?
Yeah, exactly. It drove me crazy. I was like, what are you, friggin' Socrates? But I appreciated it because he didn't let me take the easy way out. And it, over time, as a 22-year-old, you kind of go, shut up, just tell me what it's about. As someone who's now growing more comfortable with nuance and mystery, I sort of like the idea that there is no easy answer. And in order to figure it out, you got to sit with it a bit. And I'm okay with people interpreting it any way that they want to. I felt like it was important that I didn't play my card too heavily on that. So, I could have written much more. Do I want to? Not really. I write. I'm tired of writing. I mean, I'm not. I love writing, and that's my every morning I come and I write. But when it comes to speaking to the photography world, I've written a lot of words. Yeah. And just once in a while, I would just like to say, here are my photographs, and maybe no one will buy the book, and I'll realize people actually don't want to look at my images. They'd rather just hear me babble on for hours, which, you could make millions on this podcast if it goes well.
That's right. And I intend to. No, I really liked the context on it because on the surface that you could make the assumption that each of these bodies of work happened in one trip or happened in a very short time, and providing that context lets us as sort of the viewer / reader know that this has been a very long process for you, that this is a very important process to you, that this is a part of your life that wasn't just here for a week and gone.
Right.
So there's almost a gravitas to the image that comes along with adding that bit of context that lets us know that I've gone back here multiple times. I've made friends here. These people know me. I know them. And there is a familiarity and maybe even some sort of a familial connection, as close as you can be, thousands of miles apart. But
Sure.
but it is more than just a collection of pretty pictures.
Right. Yeah, and I think if I did write more, it would become pedantic. I think I would be tempted to turn it into yet another sermon about the value of staying put in one place and revisiting a place and treating people with dignity and respect. And as I've already written so extensively on those themes and continue to revisit those themes in other places, I had hoped, and I appreciate the fact that you say, that you see a certain gravitas in this work, in part because who doesn't want to be associated with gravitas?
Absolutely.
It sounds very important.
We've got to keep moving though, because I've got 6 big words that I need to get through before we end this.
Excellent. Well, one of my enduring memories, not to go completely off the rails here, but one of my enduring memories of an early podcast interview you did with me, you snuck in the words vestigial tale, just like it was just normal conversation. And I sat there on the other end going,
I don't know about.
He really just used those.
I'm going to have to go back and listen now because I don't know which one that was.
I haven't the foggiest idea. No, it was the only thing I heurd you say in the whole podcast, but it stuck with me.
Well, you can't go wrong with a vestigial tale.
I have nothing to say to that. Anyway, I don't actually have the foggiest idea what we were talking about, but there was gravitas involved. And without being overly sarcastic, I did want a certain weightiness to this book, and not merely to inflate the shipping costs, but I wanted a book that sat heavy on your knee as well as on your mind. I did not plan to say that, but I got to write that down. That sounds like marketing speak. Like that.
And you're going to give me a hard time? Come on, duChemin.
Steel tail. Look over here. No, I think if you look at my work from the last couple of years, because a lot of this work I've presented before in other ways and done it in color, and my work has been known for a certain brightness and a certain hopefulness. And over the last couple of years, it's taken a bit of a darker turn, not in terms of the themes, but I've just been more willing to embrace the shadows, and I've gone much more to monochrome than I have for years and years since I left the black and white darkroom behind. And I think that comes into it, the choices. I love making books. I love the fact that I get to sit down and choose the paper and the linen for the spine and the kind of cover treatment. I actually prefer this book without the dust jacket. I made the dust jackets candidly because I think they sell better if you've got something to show that's got a picture on it. But my own personal copy of this book, I leave the dust jacket off. Which I can afford to do because I have like 300 other copies of this sitting around with dust jackets on them.
Right. Ready to ship.
Exactly. Operators are standing by. If you order now, you get a free dust jacket. It's a very gray and black book. The end sheets are black and everything's just, even the images were processed with a duotone that had a warm gray in it and a little bit of grain to kind of give it the grit that is present in the lives of these people. And it didn't feel appropriate to me to have a shiny, happy book with colorful images. Not that there is not an abundance of color in their lives, but I wanted that feeling of that weightiness, without using the word gravitas again. That's exactly the way the word that describes, in hindsight, my entire experience. It has been a tremendous life experience. And that's the gift of photography to me. And I think that's the gift of going back to places. So, to return to my pedantic streak, as photographers, I think the best photographers, the ones that have become known for bodies of work, the ones that we look at, they are known for returning to these places, for
Absolutely.
Henri Cartier-Bresson for his work in Paris, and Douaneau for his work even in just, the market of Les Halles in Paris. There are so many great photographers that I think they became great because of the constant depths that they were plumbing in one or two places, rather than the trend in travel photography these days, which is, collecting countries, and they go for as short a period as they can possibly afford. They jump on a bus tour and they run around like crazy, and they have a day in each place. I get these emails all the time. I'm going to Venice for a day. What should I shoot? I just want to say nothing. Put your camera down and enjoy Venice. If all you've got is a day, you don't got a hope. And I wish I could say something pithy or give them a recipe, but there isn't. You have to, if you want your work to be more than just, a snapshot or a postcard, you've got to go deeper, and it just takes an investment of time and money and, good old fashioned blood, sweat, and tears, because not every trip's going to be good. You're going to go to places and just go, oh, that just didn't work out for whatever reason. That's why you've got to keep going back, and seeing it in some cases, different seasons, different light, different circumstances, different moods, and as you yourself evolve, you're going to want to reinterpret these things and leverage the lessons that you learned on the last couple of trips. Sure. So there's a great power in that. And I don't believe you even asked me about that, but there you go. That's a free sermon.
No, I think it's terrific. And you're right. You do see this. And if you look at some of the greats that we keep coming back to, the Saul Leiters, the Fred Herzogs, the Gary Winograns, even if you're talking street, they were mining the same streets again and again and again and again, and seeing differently each and every time. And I think that's, to your point, that's one of the things that gave them such incredible bodies of work, because we get to see, much the way you've done here, we get to see the changes over the course of years or sometimes decades, and it becomes more and more important with the passing of time, I think, as we're documenting the passing of time.
I think so. I mean, it depends on what's important to you as a photographer. But for me, it is important that I experience, not just, let's set aside the whole issue of publishing and sharing my work with the world. It is important for me that I experience these things at the deepest possible level. And it's why I continue to go back to these places. So even doing this book, when the part of what motivated me to start doing it was the question was, am I done with this project? I'm done with the book. Clearly it's out. There's, it's shipping, but, I can't not go back looking at these images. I actually, when I started this project, I had decided I was done with going to Lalibela, Ethiopia, and I'm already putting my next trip together for January 2020, because as much as I want desperately to be done with the place, every time I'm there, I say, this has got to be my last time. I can't stand
I'm not
food,
coming back. Yeah.
And I don't really like crowds of people.
Right.
And so and yet I can't not come back. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the work progresses even from there. But you can't wait until the work is truly done before you publish, because then it's never done.
Right.
At what point have I stopped growing? I mean, I'm proud of this stuff now, but I hope I have a long enough life that in 10, 20 years, I look back and go, that was the work of a younger man, and his vision and his perspective and his ideas have changed. And maybe there's a follow-up, but to stop and just simply move on, I think impoverishes us. It robs us of the opportunity to go deeper. That's the stuff people want, not clever eye candy. I mean, I know that shit gets likes on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, but the stuff that I think that lasts is deeper than the quick shot, the easy low hanging fruit stuff.
Sure. Let's go back for a minute. You talked about the grit and duotoning and the technical part of getting it right.
Sure.
How many iterations did you go through to get it right? And did you feel a responsibility not only to the work, but to the people that you were representing with the work to get it right? Where did that responsibility come from? And it's probably multi-level if I know you.
Yeah, well, you don't know me, man. You don't know me.
You know nothing.
It's funny. I used to hear conversations like this and hear artists or photographers talking about, this work explores the blah, 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 and the responsibility for the work. And I thought, oh my God, these people are just so full of it. And yet I find myself in a place where I hear things like that. And I resonate with it. I'm like, yes, I do feel a responsibility. It is weightier to me than mere whim. So it took a number of times to go through and get proofs. There was one image especially I was particularly married to. I mean, it was one of the first images I took on my first trip, my first exposure to Lalibela. I came into town and it was Christmas Eve, and people were sitting on, like, they were so crowded around this church service that they had climbed trees to watch, and it was very kind of biblical. And I could not get that black and white version to work, the conversion of that image. I got strange haloing, and but I didn't really notice it until the first proof came in, and I wrestled with it and finally I had to call the printer and just say, look, you got to put a different image in. But what was exciting about that, despite my frustration, the frustration was twofold. One, I'd gone years without really noticing how poor this image quality was. In terms of my own work on it, it just worked better in color based on what I wanted to do with the tones in black and white. I had never printed that specific image in the way that I was doing now, and I realized it just did not hold together. So I was frustrated about that. But the joy for me came out of the need to replace it and looking through the catalog of back images and going, I've been thinking about these images for so long. I wonder if there's anything new. So I went back and did like a 7th edit on my unstarred, unpicked, total garbage images from the last 12 years. And I found one that I hadn't even seen before. And I love it. I love that photograph. And it is, to go back to our conversation, it is one of these images that features someone on a cell phone in one of the churches, and she's dramatically lit with this beam of light. I'm just flipping through here to see if I can find it, because for those that do have it, the book, or plan to get it, I think, to reference it might be okay. But it was such a surprise, to find this thing and go, oh my God, after this long, here I am looking at new work. Like, really, I mean, I had not seen this, but it was one of the images I took several years ago. It's plate 11. It's the 11th image. And so not only surprised by the photograph itself and how much I loved it, but how well it paired with the image on the facing page and with some of the other images in the book. How at the time I think I rejected it because it had some motion blur and it was not a great color image. So I was looking through, and we all do this when we edit, we look through a certain set of filters. We look for a certain thing. We are looking for a great color image or a great image to fit into this body of work, or for sharpness, or whatever our criteria is. And we're not judging it on the entire merits of the image itself. And so I found this image that became plate 11, and just I was completely taken with it all of a sudden. And that actually was the image that made me go, I've got to go back, because suddenly I realized there are more things that I have not done as much as I'd like. There are things I haven't focused on. I'd actually like to go back and see if I can just focus on people with cell phones and in more interesting contradictions and juxtapositions. There's work in this particular monograph with people looking straight at the camera, and not in that smiling, happy for the camera, posy kind of way, but in a very almost awkward, tense way. And
is this what you want, kind of thing?
Not even, like, just staring at the camera, like, who is this foreigner and what is he doing here? And so that the person looking at the photograph becomes a part of that scene. They are now being the observed rather than the observer.
Sure.
And that surprised me. When I started playing with it and looking at it, going, I can't even explain initially why I love this, but I do, and it has to be a part of this. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized why I loved it, because it puts you there. It is a more true, a more authentic representation of what it feels like to be a 6-foot white guy with a bunch of camera gear walking around in that particular context, in that crowded pilgrimage, people are looking at you. It is awkward. There is not a negative tension, but there is sort of a tension that's just simply created by your presence, a contrast, let's say. And I felt it was important to put that in the book. So the more, I've been saying to people, this is what I have made over the last 10 years. But the reality is this also is what has made me over the last 10 years. This process has made me a different photographer, a different human being. And of course, there's been incredible life circumstances that have happened in that last 10 years as well. But I think the minute photographers can put their cameras down long enough to concentrate on the other things that matter in the creative process and the other things that scratch their itch. And maybe instead of buying that new lens, they get a printer and they start holding their work, or they start putting their books, their images into books, that are published by even just one-offs like blurb.com or Artifact Uprising. There's a bunch of places that you can get your stuff done. But the ability to create bodies of work, to live with your work, to, beyond the camera stuff, I think is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that phrase, live with your work. And I've actually run into, or had several conversations with photographers over the past probably 6-8 months that have used that phrase specifically, living with their work, and printing it out and tacking it up on the walls, or, as you said, doing these one-off books just to see what it feels like, not on a 3-inch screen or in a catalog view in Lightroom, because it is a very different experience holding a print or a printed book than seeing that sort of, well, it's artificial, isn't it? At some point, it's electrons bouncing around rather than holding this thing in your hand.
And I don't think that diminishes the potential for impact.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just different.
It is very different. And I think that's why we're seeing a movement back to analog. I think that's why people are so vocal with their, film is not dead hashtags, as much as I think it misses the point. I think the tactility of it, the haptic qualities of a book or a print. I actually believe that the best place, the most natural home for photographs is the book, not the wall. The wall's great, but that allows you to put one image up, but it on some level reduces it to decor. Does it match the couch? Does it fit in the room? Whereas the book, you can take it out whenever you want. You can put it away, and then you can pour over these images and feel them in your hand, even if it's just your own work. I think it's really, really important. Yeah. And I think, this wouldn't be known as the gravitas episode, but it does lend
the gravitas / haptic episode.
Exactly so. Yes. The gravitas of hapticness. I think when you hold your own work, I'm always telling students, yes, you got to live with your work. That's a big part of it. But at a certain point, you've got to sign it. You've got to sign your work and call it done, and have made something, not always be in this process. The process is so important. But if it doesn't get you to a place where you can finally, art's about making decisions. And sometimes I worry we're just all revisiting the same old stuff. And it's like when we get bored, when we're not having success with our current work, we go back to the oldies and we polish our turds, and it's like we're just not getting anywhere. And I think if you can put your name to it, if you can print it and sign your name to it, go there, that's my Varanasi work. For now, that's my Venice work for now, but it's in an archival box. It's printed, 8.5 by 11, and you've signed your prints. And once in a while you take them out. I love when friends come over and they say, "Hey, how's your latest trip?" Instead of going, "Here's an iPad," you know what they do? Flip, 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 flip.
Yep.
Oh, that's nice. Ooh, I like that. Flip, flip. And then they hand it back to you. There's the medium itself encourages that speed of ingestion. Whereas if you put a box of prints in front of someone, they take their time. On many occasions, they go wash their hands. They come back and they pick up the glass of wine with one hand and they slowly turn the pictures and they look, and it's a completely different experience. And that's not to downplay digital. I am a digital guy through and through, but at some point you are robbing yourself if you don't put it into a form that people can ingest slowly. You know what I want? I want to start like the slow food movement of photography, not the enforced, go back to film thing, which
Right.
is, it's all well and good, but just no matter what your technology. I mean, every image in this book was photographed on digital, and I have no desire to go back to film, but I have a great desire to encourage to sit, chew your damn food and do it while you're not watching the TV, to sit and ingest this stuff and think about it and let it touch us rather than it being sort of a, swipe like and move on cycle that I think encourage us to bounce along the surface of things too much.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's something that I have thought about and spoken to and even recorded recently. The idea of a book, in addition to everything that you said so eloquently, it allows me to, I think, connect to a photographer or an artist on a much deeper level than simply looking at a single print. I
Sure.
love looking through a period in someone's life, a period in someone's career, and seeing how the changes maybe in their personal life affected the work or vice versa. And I think it builds a stronger connection to that artist than just one-offing a single print.
I think so, especially, when you pay, like, here's a great example, and this is way off topic, but what the hell, we can do whatever we want, right?
That's right.
This is our thing.
This is our thing. It's just you and me, baby.
I'm a big fan of Saul Leiter, and
Yep.
I have been waiting and waiting and waiting. I've not patiently. Amazon's like, thank you for your patience. I'm like, you don't know me. I've been very impatient about this, but finally,
I have several strongly worded letters at the ready.
Exactly. Where's my book? Finally, Saul Leiter's latest book, obviously published, years posthumously, but his latest book is called In My Room. And, I've been waiting for it for months, and it kept saying it was coming out, and then it wasn't. And who knows what the journey to having this thing published was like. But it's very different. Saul Leiter is known as a colorist. He's, often put in, the same category as people like Herzog and Ernst Haas. And his color work is lovely. But last year at some point, I got his book, Early Black and White. It's a two-book set, and total surprise. Absolutely loved it. Mm-hmm. And then I got this book, In My Room. And when you pay $50 or $60 or whatever, rather than just go onto someone's Instagram feed, not that Saul Leiter has an Instagram feed, but you get my point. You pay the money and you're sitting with it. You give it, I hope you give it more than one shot. So here's why I say that, because I opened In My Room and I did that initial kind of just slow, but let's see what the whole body, give it a survey, right? And I got done and I was like, this book should have been called Naked Women in My Shithole of a New York Apartment. Like it was
harsh.
My reaction was very harsh, and I was disappointed because I was expecting a certain thing. And when I went back and I read the essay at the beginning, and I sat with each image for longer, and I went, okay, clearly I was expecting that painterly feel of his color work, and that, I was expecting something different. But instead, what I got was unvarnished Saul Leiter. I saw a completely different side of him, and I'm not going to mince words, his apartment is a total dingy shithole. But seeing these women and these photographs were, friends and lovers and people from many years over various places that he lived, and seeing his view of them and the candidness and the vulnerability, I was shocked at how much I wouldn't say liked it, but how much I learned from it and how much I appreciated that in that window into Saul Leiter's life. I would not have got that if I merely went to his website and flipped through his online galleries. I would have judged it once and moved on, and I would have been the poorer for it. I would have missed that opportunity. And so all of this, I think, to say, when we look at the work of other people in a book. And my shelves are groaning. Before this episode started, we talked about the fact that I'm looking for a new house. The fact is, I'm just doing it because I need more for bookshelves.
I need more shelf space.
There's only two of us, but I need like a 5-bedroom house just for my damn books. But the books, they allow us so much more. And we, as we have moved into the digital era, have increasing opportunities to impoverish ourselves, to speed up the process by which we engage in photography, but at the expense of depth. And I worry about that. Not for other people. They're welcome to do whatever they want, but I worry about it for myself. I don't want to find at the end of my career that I have only skimmed along the surface of things.
Do you really worry about that? Given the words, have you not read your own books? I mean, is this something that really crosses your mind more than as a passing sort of thought experiment?
Well, I mean, I don't. It does, and it's not because if you're comparing myself to a first year photography student, then of course, yes, David he's got very many words, and some of them are deep. But as a person for whom the depth is relative, it's not just that I want to go deep, because it's that I just want to always go deeper. I want to push myself deeper and see what is yet unseen, both in my own self and in the world around me. And so, yes, I do worry about it. I do worry that I give less than what I'm capable of. I worry that in terms of leaving some kind of legacy, it is important for me to have some kind of impact. I don't have to change the world, but I sure would love to leave the world better than when I entered in some way. And if that's just for one person and helping them, I think photography allows us to live. It allows us to live a more wakeful life, a more observant, more fully alive life by paying more attention to the moments and the things around us. And I want to be a voice that helps people, not the least of whom is myself, but I want to help people see the world around them and appreciate it and learn this craft for more than the ability to press a button and change a shutter dial. So yeah, it is a concern. I wouldn't say it keeps me up at night thinking, oh, am I being deep? Does this book have gravitas? I don't know.
I'm still blown away that you can change the shutter dial.
Sometimes I take it off of P. It does worry me. And I think every artist in history, and I don't use artist with like a capital A, like it's a pretentious, precious thing.
Sure.
I just mean people that create art, whether it's good or bad, or you're indifferent to it. But I do think people that create art, they want something more than mere, because isn't that the difference between art and craft really? Is one of them we pour ourselves into? Craft is it may take hard work, but are you really when you color by numbers, are you really being vulnerable with your paints? Not really. As an artist, I want to pour myself into it, and that requires something of us. And so, yeah, I do. I want to. We're incredibly. Look, I was a magician for 12 years and did comedy and stuff. But the magic part, I learned we're incredibly able to deceive ourselves. Sure. And I don't ever want to be that person that deceives himself into thinking he is currently creating the best work ever, or that he is currently the deepest, profoundest photographer in the world. I know that I'm not remotely that. I don't aspire to that. But I also know that I can continue to challenge myself. I can continue to grow, and my work can improve. It's one of the reasons I push people to print, because it will show you the flaws in your work. It will show you where you're getting lazy. It will suggest new directions when you hang a bunch of them up and look at them in a sequence and play with them and ask yourself, what happens if this becomes a book? And, to your eternal surprise, one day you go, it is a book.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
When you look at this book, take your name off the title page for a minute. If you were to pick this up in a bookshop, and again, difficult to imagine because you've poured so much into it, but what do you suppose your reaction to it would be? Would you be pleased with it? Would you feel not only the empathy or the connection to the people, but what the photographer was trying to say?
Well, first of all, I would buy 3 copies, and I would go on Facebook and encourage my entire circle of friends to do the same, knowing that there are only 500 in
Right,
existence.
right.
No, I think, I hope so. I hope I hope that I would. And, yeah, I hope I would, in the sense that I'm always striving to capture something of the quality. When I pick up a book by, pick one of my idols, Sebastião Salgado, and I
Good choice.
feel what I feel with his work. I hope that others will do the same. And so I would say yes, because if I didn't, then I have to question, why did I even make that image, pick that image, process it, and then put it into a book? I think these photographs succeed in what I wanted to accomplish. What has been the most gratifying thing is that other people are beginning to say it. As this book kind of makes its way around the world, people are sending me letters and saying how affected they have been by it, and how people have been on some level moved to tears, and which is strange for me, because I don't look at this book and think this is going to really move people to tears, but clearly we all experience things in different way, and I have been moved to tears by the work of other people, just not generally my own stuff, unless it's really, really bad. I've looked at some images on the back of my camera and been moved to tears for an entirely different reason. But yes, I hope, my goal is, I would not have spent $40,000 creating this thing,
right,
if I did not feel like, when I put it out into the world, it was the best possible representation of where my art is at right now in this moment. And only time will tell, only time will tell whether this becomes a book that people look back and say, I go back to this time and time again. Only time will tell what kind of regrets I'll have. When I did my first art book, it must be four years ago or 5 years ago now, called Chemin. And it was just sort of a retrospective images over 7 years, shot on 7 continents. And I look back and I would not say regrets, but there occasionally I wish I'd done it differently. I wish it had been more thematic and less of a kind of just a collection of pretty images. How that would have played out, I have no idea. But I wonder, I can't do anything about it now, so I'm proud of the book. It's still, I think, it's still a strong book. People still buy it and love it. But I'm curious, what will I say about this book in 2 years when I'm doing the next book? I have another book planned for 2 years from now, from my work in Lesotho. And there's a Basotho word for shepherd, which is Badisana. And it's spelled Balisana. And it's a pretty looking word. It sounds, it's pronounced Badisana. And the book will just be called Badisana, Shepherds of the Mountain Kingdom. And that will be very similar to Pilgrims and Nomads, but it will be the shepherds from this small little kingdom in Southern Africa. And 2 years from now, I wonder how I'm going to be, responding to that work, and at the same time looking back at Pilgrims and Nomads and, seeing the chasm between who I am now and who I will be in 2 years. I think that's part of the excitement about photography, is that it's always about exploration. And, especially in the case of a living photographer, you get to go along with them on that journey. I do that with the work of people like Steve McCurry, and of course, people like Salgado and Irwit. You see them grow and change. To your point earlier, it's not merely a record of what they have seen, but it's a piece of themselves. And I think that's significant. If we can, as artists, somehow get us an increasing piece of ourselves into our work as we grow and mature, I think we've done something of value.
Is there a portion of this body of work that either resonates with you more deeply or that you remember either more fondly or has a stronger impact on you, and why?
Yeah, it's funny. I see. Though this book I think has a certain cohesion to it. It is two distinct monographs, and while the Pilgrim stuff is interesting to me because of my background in theology and because of my interest in seeing, the things for which people hunger, specifically sort of the stuff at the higher end of the hierarchy of needs, the spiritual stuff. I'm fascinated by that. But I have always, as a visitor to Lalibela, Ethiopia, always been merely a visitor. I have always been an arm's length away from it all, no matter how close I actually was. Whereas the journeys that represent now the work that is in Nomads have been really deeply personal. I mean, my first visit there, I was in a village that one of the very first moments I was in that village, we sat in this little hut talking to these women. I did this whole book or the work that's in this book in collaboration with a group called the Boma Project, and they do a wonderful work in Northern Kenya. And it was a collaborative thing that, in fact, the first time I was there, they hired me to work for them. After that, it became a sort of a collaboration that was pro bono, and it was a real partnership. And I was sitting in this stick hut, covered in goat skins, with these women that were involved with the Boma Project, and we were talking with them. And
can you give a little bit of background? I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you give a little bit of, just for those people who are listening, what is the Boma Project and why you got connected with them?
Yeah, I mean, I for years, made my living as an assignment photographer doing humanitarian work, and the Boma Project was this, at the time, quite a small. It's still small. It's not a big agency, but it was a small grassroots little NGO started by a woman who had, done a lot of work with the United Nations, and also in her background had gone to school in Nairobi and had been a safari guide, and eventually ended up back. Her home was in Vermont, still is in New England, and she wanted to create actual change instead of some big agency that was, just dishing out aid. She wanted to train women to be entrepreneurs on a tiny, tiny scale. And so she created this thing called the Boma Project, which functionally, you give a group of women $50 and that becomes their grant. And you teach them to save, you teach them to do basic accounting that doesn't involve being literate. And you just teach them a number of principles, and these women were off to the races. I mean, the stories I was hearing were incredible and so needed, because we're talking about a place where, that sort of, I mean, we talked for years about these being among the world's first climate change refugees, people that just could not now escape the tightening drought cycles. And so the children were no longer dying, and we were getting people to graduate out of extreme poverty just into run-of-the-mill average poverty. And so I was in this little hut, and these women start arguing, and they keep looking at me, and they're quite heated. It's like a bunch of Italians, very passionate. Right. And
you're unsure of what's about to happen, though.
I was like, I'm either dinner or they're going to marry me off to someone, or like they was getting very suspicious, and they kept pointing at me and smiling, and I was like, oh, what's going on? And I said, Kuro, what are they? Kuro is my guide and my translator, and one of the staff in the leadership of the Boma Project. And anyway, he said, they're talking about you. I said, well, I can see that, Kura. And what are they talking about? He said, well, they're talking about your name. They're arguing about your name. I said, why don't you just tell them my name? He says, not your English name, your Rendili name. I said, well, Kura, I don't have a Rendili name. He goes, duh, that's what they're arguing.
That's what they're arguing. Okay. All right.
And these women had decided on behalf of this village that they were going to adopt me. And they gave me this Rendili name, Akeno, which means bringer of good. And
say it again, please.
The word is Akeno, 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 and it means bringer of good. And at the time I was a little bit sort of like, oh, okay, is this the shtick? Is this the they adopt the white guy, give him a Rendili name, and hope that he forks out some cash. Right, but you know what? This has been a remarkable relationship. I mean, when I had an accident 7 years ago that about, others may not, but I fell off this wall and shattered my feet. And one of the first things that was delivered to the hospital was this beautiful, it's on my desk right now, this beautiful olive wood, they call it a rungu. It's basically a war club, and the elders carry them. And my village had been told that I had this accident, and the elders gathered the villagers together for a whole day under the thorn tree and held prayers for this, for clumsy Akeno who'd fallen off this wall in Italy. And when I returned, the first time I returned after this accident, it was unbelievable. I mean, everyone got together. We bought a camel and had like, a big Rendili barbecue. This was before I kind of, started eating vegan.
Right.
Actually, one of the reasons I started eating vegan. But it was this incredible experience where at the end I am sitting in a circle of Rendili elders who are chanting and praying for me. And every time they said a prayer, they bang their staff on the ground, and I could feel the ground vibrating.
Wow.
I show up at this village, and I have one of the women that was in that hut that on that first encounter, she will see me. She will come running. She will throw her arms around me, tears running down her face, and she will sit while we have chai, and she will not let go of my hand. She will hold my hand. I don't know a word of Rendili. Okay, I know like one word, and I can never remember it until I get there and repeat it 12 times. Right. It's basically hello and everything. Right. Every time they say something, hello, hello, hello.
You're that guy in the village.
I'm that guy, and they're like, Kano's a nice guy, but he's a bit of an idiot. So it has turned into this incredible relationship, and I have just now sent the last payment off to the school in this small nursing college in Kenya, where I'm putting one of the kids from this village through nursing school.
Wow.
So that he can go back. And, we talked a long time ago. I mean, this has been a number of years now. I mean, I put him through high school and now through nursing college. And, at the time it was, well, what are you going to do when you get out? Are you just going to go to Nairobi and, live the life? And he wants to come back to his village.
Wow.
And, so it's that kind of thing. And you cannot help, I think, even if you can't speak a word of the language, you cannot help but have this closeness. And that, people say, why is this work important to you? I can't put it into words any more than if someone said, well, why is it important for you to have a photograph of your father or your mother? It just is important. These people are no longer in the abstract, just nomads on the edge of the desert in Kenya. These people are in a very real way, though certainly not the deepest of ways, in a very real way, our family. And I am concerned for them. And to have the privilege of being a part of, of their life, and I still have, like I said, I still have this rungu, this war club sitting on my desk, and it's a symbol to me. It was a symbol then to keep fighting, and it's a symbol now to keep fighting for them as well. I'm not of the opinion that just because I live in the so-called first world that I owe anything to anyone. I do not owe it to the third world to give them my money or to make photographs of them. It's far beyond obligation. It's a privilege, an opportunity to get to know people and to have a relationship with them. There's no rich person out there that has an obligation to me. Bill Gates is not out there thinking, boy, I sure hope David's doing okay. But it transcends that.
Hope you get the house, Dave.
Yeah. So it's not about pity. It's not about anything more than this incredible opportunity and I have learned so much from them. I mean, there's a wisdom that nomadic cultures have that we do not. And, to have spent the time that I have, and it hasn't nearly been as much as I would like it to have been, but to have spent that time with those people I keep getting goats. People keep giving me goats and camels. I have more goats and camels in Kenya that are being taken care of by various herdsmen that have been given to me as gifts. And I had this moment where where Kura, who I mentioned before, where he took me aside at one point after yet another awkward opportunity to, someone gave me a camel, and he said, I don't understand it, David. He said, I've been working in Northern Kenya for a long time, and no one's ever given me a goat or a camel. What is it? I said, well, for the life of me, I couldn't tell you exactly, but I think it has something to do with this. When you sit with someone and you look through your lens at them long enough to see or to catch a glimpse of, and this is going to come off as overly poet warrior, but
no, it's not. Hit it.
But to sit there and stare through your lens at someone long enough to glimpse their soul, long enough to see them, not merely look at them, but to have seen them is something I think that happens too seldom in life, no matter where those people are. And to be seen and recognized and called by name rather than treated like a novelty, or a trophy to be shot with the camera and put on the wall.
A transaction.
It's a true gift. And pragmatically speaking, if we have to go there, it makes for better photographs, but only because it makes for better experiences. And those better experiences, I think, make better photographers. And somewhere down the road that, karmically, that all kind of pays off and the photographs are better as well. Not always, but that's my hope, is that then people experience that, and somewhere in that photograph is some of that experience and some of that revelation.
How long did it take, or when did this? And again, you just used the word revelation. Could you feel this from the beginning? Was this in your psyche, your thought process from that first visit, or did this way of seeing these people and connecting with this culture evolve over time?
I think the first kind of the raw materials were there. When I started working with BOMA, it was on the heels of several years working for other humanitarian organizations and getting a sense of some of the stuff. But it was always go to a place, show up, photograph, leave. And so when I started to spend a little bit more time in the same places and then revisit those places, I started to see, I hungered for more when I was working for these. That's why I left working for the big organizations, because I wanted something more personal. I wanted to hear stories. I didn't want to have to always be creating propaganda where I felt there were other stories to be told. Sure. These orgs, they want happy, smiling pictures of children holding goats, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the full story.
Right.
And it
ceased to be an assignment, it sounds like.
Yeah. It did. I mean, it became, after my first trip with the BOMA project, it became something that I was just passionate about and curious about and needed more time to pursue. And they did too. They, I said, hey, if I come back, can you use the photographs? And they said, absolutely. And so they got what they wanted. I got what I wanted. And that something was access and relationship and a return to these places that was becoming really important to me. So, everything's iterative, right? You start a project and it looks like one thing, and the more you do it and are open to it changing, and the more it becomes another thing. So I can't say that it started at the beginning like this and it's still like this. And it started as one thing, this photographer looking for a new way to do his humanitarian work without it being propaganda-ish, and realizing that was going to require time and patience, and those were things that I could control. Those were things that I could make happen.
Do you identify with the ideology or the word pilgrim or nomad? Do you identify with one more than another personally, and has that changed over time?
Well, that's an interesting question, Jeffrey Sidoris. I would say metaphorically, they're no. Metaphorically,
it's an interesting question.
Yeah,
but
no,
it
is. But no. I toyed with my other answer just being yes, but because it's both. No, the as metaphors. I mean, let's not be too. I'm neither a pilgrim nor a nomad. I have a comfortable existence. I have a clean, nice house. And yet the idea of nomadism, the idea of pilgrimage, there's a quote in the beginning of Pilgrims that from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, where he says, we are all of us pilgrims. And of course he means it in a metaphorical way, but it's the idea of wandering. It's the idea of looking for home and exploring and seeking something. And I think importantly, a pilgrimage, the idea of pilgrimage, it's not where you go that really is the point. It's the going. It's the person that you become in the going to these places. So I think you combine that with sort of the restlessness of nomadism and the searching for home, and they both seem like apt metaphors for my life.
If you'd like to pick up a copy of David's book, Pilgrims and Nomads, head over to davidduchemin.com. That's DAVIDDUCHEMIN.com, where you can also browse his various portfolios and sign up for his newsletter, The Contact Sheet. You can also find David on Instagram at davidduchemin and on Facebook at Vision is Better. Subscribe to Process Driven or the new Jeffrey Sidoris Everything feed in your favorite podcast app. And you can connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at Jeffrey Sidoris. That's JEFFERYSADDORIS. If you're a photographer and you're looking to dive a little deeper into photography, check out my book, Photography by the Letter. It's got more than 170 terms defined and explained, as well as answers to common questions, helpful exercises, even interviews with 6 terrific photographers, including David duChemin. It's available as both a paperback and a downloadable ebook at photographybytheletter.com. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back for the next one.